Welcome to the Dynamics of Everyday Life, where we demystify some tricky concepts and get to know ourselves a little bit better. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Although the episodes have been going out regularly over the summer, it feels like there's been quite a gap since I last put an episode together because I've been batching. I'm really pleased to be back behind the microphone and talking all things psychodynamic again. And this week's topic is one that I came up with a few weeks ago, but I've had lots of other ideas that have seemed to make their way up the list first. And maybe it's because this one is a bit of a challenge for me to do, or maybe the timing hasn't been right, or maybe it's just because it actually feels quite personal to me. So, what are we talking about this week? This week I'm talking about friendships. I've touched on this before, back in the day, in some of my really early episodes, but as I've grown into the podcast and refined my structure and how I approach topics, I've decided that this is one that's worth revisiting from a different angle. Today, I'm specifically looking at what happens to your friendships when your world falls apart. Do they rally round knowing what to do and how to respond to you? Or do you get passive-aggressive messages because things have changed and you can't maintain the friendship in the way that they were used to up until now? I'm not going to lie, this episode does have a fairly personal element to it. So let's give it a bit of context. Regular listeners and people who know me well know that last year was not the easiest for me. I'm not going to go into all the details. Suffice to say that I was in a situation that only now I'm realising what a huge impact this had on me at the time. I am out the other side now and I'm in a much better place, but it did take me a lot longer to get over than I anticipated. One of the things that happened was it knocked my confidence. And also my capacity to be around people so much. And to be honest, my friendship circle shrank significantly. It wasn't that I didn't want to spend time with people, but I just didn't have a huge amount to offer at that point in time. I was often distracted, and whereas I'm normally able to be in situations where I could easily lift people up if they weren't feeling great, I just couldn't do it then. I also didn't really want to repeat what was going on for me. I didn't want to have to tell the story over and over again because it felt like I was reliving it. Now, a lot of people have been great about this. My inner circle mopped my tears in all kinds of places. On the Eurostar, at events in London, and in local restaurants, to name but a few. And some people got that I was withdrawing, and they let me know that they were there as and when I was ready to come back to the world of socialising. Others? Well, not so much. Initially, I was a bit miffed about this and more than a bit hurt. I realised, however, that I'm probably not the only person that this has happened to, and in that case, it means it's definitely worth a podcast episode. What's going on here? Well, let's start with what was going on for me. I was going through a traumatic episode, and so my nervous system went into survival mode. My amygdala was in full charge of the show at that point, and it meant that I was often in fight or flight mode. I was only allowing into my world what felt safe at the time, and also because I was spending an awful lot of my time assessing whether things felt safe to me or not. I sometimes just cut my losses and kept things and or people at bay. In psychodynamic terms, I was regressing to a smaller protective circle. I wasn't rejecting other people. I was defending myself against the situation and the unknown environment that I was operating in, because I'd never been in that situation before. There were defence mechanisms at play all over the place here. I was withdrawing from people and situations because it all just felt too much. I avoided invitations to go to places because I felt exposed, and in these times I needed to protect myself at all cost. And then there were also times when I went into denial. I'd tell myself that it wasn't really that bad in order to cope. But that meant that I was keeping the truth of the situation away from people. So they couldn't understand why I was behaving in this way because I wasn't appearing to give it that much weight. In these types of situation, there's often some projection too. Friends might feel hurt as they feel you withdraw, and instead of saying that they miss you, which is actually what's happening, they push it back onto you and decide that in actual fact you aren't a good friend. What's going on here is that they're managing their own anxiety by making it all about you. This also ties in with the idea of displacement. We can't safely express our anger to the appropriate location or person, so frustration can seep into other relationships, and sometimes that does include our friendships. With all this swirling around, there's often a lot of guilt and shame added in the mix too. There's frequently an internalised voice that says we need to keep showing up for people. We can't let other people down. But it might be that we physically and mentally can't be there for other people in these moments. And then we feel guilty. But that guilt is not about the present. It's because we can't respond to that internalised voice. The shame is a way of turning that anger and sadness towards ourselves, rather than tolerating that some friends just can't hold us where we are at that moment. We tell ourselves that we aren't a good friend, when really, all we're doing is looking after ourselves the best we can do in that moment. Why do our friends get miffed about this? On an unconscious level, they might be envious of the closeness that we have with our inner circle. Why are you giving them something that you're not giving me? Or they might be caught in the narcissistic injury of not being chosen. This can trigger their own childhood wounds of exclusion. So their passive aggression isn't really about us, it's about their inability to tolerate the feeling of being left out or less important. So what does a true friendship look like psychodynamically? Winnicott would call it being able to hold you in your depleted state without demanding that you be different. Bion might describe it as friends who can contain your feelings. They absorb your distress without spitting it back at you. And we all know that feeling, don't we, of being with a friend who absolutely accepts us for who we are. Really doesn't matter what state we're in at that moment. They are absolutely fine with who we are and accept us for us in that moment. Whereas those who can't tolerate this, well, maybe that tells you something about the limits of the relationship or friendship. My invitation for you this week is for you to consider where in your life your friendships haven't been working, and whether you've been the one that's needed to withdraw, or whether it's actually your friends that have needed that space. And slightly controversially, how have you responded to this? A friend of mine once said to me that we have friends for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And I think that there's a lot of truth in this. And whilst friendships do need attention, often the best friendships don't need daily maintenance. And, as always, give yourself some grace. The world of friendships can be a tricky one to navigate as they're so fundamental to our well-being, whilst also being dynamically charged with expectations, hopes, and often unsaid feelings. If you can't wait for the next podcast, and let's face it, who can? There's my weekly LinkedIn live sessions. I'm doing these on Monday afternoons at 2:30, so come and join the fun that we have in those. Unless it's a bank holiday, then I'll have my feet up and I'll be watching a James Bond film. And as we always finish, looking at ourselves at this level can be challenging and unnerving as we develop our awareness, so I'd always encourage that you do this at your own speed. To have a chat about psychodynamics and find out more about the different ways that you can work with me, either as a trainer, coach, supervisor or mentor, then click on the link that's in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Dynamics of Everyday Life. Don't forget to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. As well as producing this podcast, The Dynamics of Everyday Life has lots more psychodynamic fun going on, and you can find out more at dynamicsofeveryday.life.